This is Steve Pope, and we're going to be talking about the clinical research site. So you're probably asking yourself, well, what is a clinical site? It's basically the entity that conducts the clinical trial on behalf of the sponsor in accordance with the sponsor's protocol and with good clinical practice requirements. So usually this is going to be a research facility that's associated with, but is going to be separate from a medical practice. Here in the Triangle area, we are used to large academic clinical research sites such as Duke, UNC, maybe a few others. But there are also a lot of smaller clinical sites that can be affiliated with smaller facilities such as maybe a single physician medical practice. And in some cases, these sites might be part of a larger network of similar sites. It's not uncommon for there to be network of sites. There may be 4, 5, 6 sites that are in maybe a geographical area or maybe a regional area. Sometimes they may participate in the same studies. Sometimes they may have investigators that are shared between the sites. That can occur sometimes. So it's important to understand exactly what a clinical site is. It's going to be a research facility that is separate from a specific medical facility, and it's there specifically to conduct research, to conduct clinical research studies, not to deliver care. Our learning objectives include define and discuss the components of a clinical research site, also to define the personnel roles that are found at the typical clinical research site. We're also going to cite the responsibilities of sites in conducting a clinical trial. What exactly are they required to do? Why are they required to do it? And then finally, we're going to discuss the types of monitoring visits that are conducted at the site during the trial. So I'll go into a little more detail about those as we go along. So let's start by answering the question, who works at the clinical site? There are some specific staff roles that are common to each clinical site, although not all of them may have these, but most of them will. And these are going to be the principal investigator, or the PI. That's going to be the individual that conducts the trial at that site, that is responsible for everything that occurs at that site during the clinical trial and afterward. So the PI in almost every case is going to be a physician licensed in that state to deliver care, and also has the necessary training to conduct a clinical trial. There are also going to be sub-investigators. The sub-investigators are going to assist the principal investigator in performing some of the procedures and assessments that are going to occur during the trial at that site. Then you're going to have clinical research coordinators. These are going to be individuals that actually conduct the day-to-day tasks that are associated with the trial. They'll schedule subjects to come in, perform some of the procedures that are done, take care of the necessary paperwork and things like that. And then finally, you're going to have regulatory associates. They may be part of a larger organization that conducts or adheres to the regulatory issues that are associated with that site. And not every site is going to have these, but many of them will. And we'll discuss those in more detail. So what do all these people do at the clinical site? Well, the clinical sites recruit, screen, and enroll subjects for the clinical trial. They also conduct the trial according to the schedule of activities in the sponsor's protocol. They'll also compile and collect the required regulatory documents for filing with the sponsor, and they'll seek IRB approval for the trial protocol amendments informed consent documents, recruiting advertisements, etc. So there are a number of activities that the people at the site are involved in. In fact, if you want to see a good synopsis of that, look at the anatomy of a clinical trial diagram that's on page 244 in A Horse Named Jim. It discusses the trial activities kind of in a chronological fashion and helps you see from kind of beginning to end a way in which the trial is going to be conducted and what activities are done at each component of that. So let's discuss in a little more detail the individual roles for the staff at the clinical research site. Some of these you're going to be familiar with, some you may or may not be familiar with, but we'll go over them in detail, and I think that'll help answer some of the questions that you may have. The first role that we're going to talk about is going to be the principal investigator or the PI. So from the regulations, the definition of the PI is the individual who actually conducts a clinical investigation, or in the event of an investigation conducted by a team of individuals, is the responsible leader for that team. You can find that in 21 CFR 56.102 and also 21 CFR 812.3. The PI's responsibilities are also discussed in detail in 21 CFR 312.60, which is the general responsibilities of investigators. The difference between these two is 21 CFR 312 is for drugs, whereas 21 CFR 812 is for medical devices. So the responsibilities are very, very similar between the two sections of the code, but they do differ a little bit. But the long and short of it is, it's the primary person that is responsible for everything that goes on at that site related to that trial. They're going to sign off on all the data that gets collected. They're going to ensure that informed consent is done properly. They will ensure that all site personnel are trained on how to conduct the trial and have the necessary training to conduct any of the procedures or assessments that are going to be performed during the trial. So if anything goes wrong or any problems occur, it's going to be the principal investigator who's held responsible for that. The principal investigator is going to sign the FDA form 1572, which is the contract between that investigator and the FDA, that they will conduct the trial in accordance with the sponsor protocol and with the GCP regulations and guidelines. So that's important to understand. The next role that we'll talk about will be the sub-investigators. So a sub-investigator assists the PI in conducting the trial. Now, in most cases, sub-investigators are usually going to be medical practitioners. They could be an MD, a DO, a physician's assistant, a nurse practitioner, or some other licensed professional that can conduct the various medical procedures that are required for the trial. In some cases, sub-investigators may be also coordinators, or they may be people that are not necessarily licensed, but they could be, say, an RN, or they could be someone that holds a certificate training in another area of medical practice. So it's important to understand that there are people that are going to assist the PI, and so they have to be adequately trained in order to do that. Sub-investigators would perform some of the tasks that require a medical practitioner's license. These would be performing physical assessments, evaluating and assessing lab results, maybe a CMP or an ECG, or some other type of assessment. They're also able to review and assess serious adverse events, as long as the principal investigator has delegated that task to them. And then finally, they would be able to approve subjects for eligibility. Ordinarily, in most cases, the principal investigator would do that, but in some cases, a sub-investigator could be delegated with that task and be able to perform it. Clinical research coordinators perform many of the study activities and procedures during the subject visit. So as the subjects come in, they're going to take certain measurements, might be vital signs, height and weight. They may draw labs. They may conduct other types of procedures. And they do all of these procedures under the supervision of the PI. And they need to be trained by the PI before they're allowed to perform those. Now, that doesn't mean that the PI is standing there, watching them do everything. But it does mean that the PI needs to have confidence that they can conduct these procedures the way they're supposed to be done in accordance to the study protocol and in accordance with any GCP requirements that there might be. Now, the coordinators are also the principal point of contact for the sponsor or the CRO's monitoring staff. So monitor is going to be in contact with them on a very frequent basis, constant basis, asking questions, seeking information. There's questions that the coordinators are going to have that they may not be familiar with, that they may have to ask the monitor about, or someone at the sponsor site. So there's going to be a lot of things that they're involved in. They're also going to be involved in maybe training other staff members. They may be involved in preparing and submitting documents to the IRB. They may get involved in the regulatory files if there's not a regulatory person available at that site. They also communicate a lot of back and forth with the sponsor and with the monitoring staff. They also recruit subjects. So this just goes into a few of the site activities that they're going to be involved in, and it's very important that that person in that role be very capable, understand the protocol very well, and also have solid experience and knowledge in the research field so that they don't make very many mistakes. And that can really help a site be extremely successful is the more competent that person in that role is. Some of the specific tasks that the clinical research coordinator is going to be involved in, they're going to be recruiting subjects. They're going to be completing source data documents. Those are going to be the documents that they, in most cases, they're going to handwrite them as the subjects come in and they perform the procedures. They're going to record the data on those source documents. Then they're going to use those to enter the data into the clinical database if it happens to be that they're working on an EDC study. Or they might hand that over to someone else to input that. Normally that will occur. They may hand it over to another coordinator, or the site may have a dedicated data entry person, or maybe a dedicated data entry staff of people that do nothing but enter the data from source documents into the clinical database. They're going to conduct follow-up phone calls with subjects, so they're going to stay in contact with them. They're also going to answer data queries that come in. We're going to go over that in a little more detail as we move along in our course. But they're going to get queries from either the CRA staff, or it could be from the data management staff, or the medical monitoring staff, or the safety staff, and they're going to answer those. They're also going to be involved in ordering supplies to make sure the site has what they need to conduct the study. They're also going to dispense study drug in some cases, depending on what it is. They're also going to collect and report adverse events and serious adverse events. they're going to be the primary point of contact for the subjects. So when subjects experience adverse events, they're going to be more likely, they're going to be the first person that knows about it. So in the case of a serious adverse event, they're going to primarily be the one that reports that to the sponsor, and they're required to do that within 24 hours of discovering the serious adverse event. They're also going to be involved in reporting protocol deviations to the Institutional Review Board. So they'll get involved in that. That may require some back and forth between the two institutions in order to satisfy those requirements. So these are just a few of the tasks or some of the principal tasks rather, that clinical research coordinators are involved in at the sites. So what are the skills, knowledge, and training required to be a clinical research coordinator? In many cases, they're going to have some medical training. They might be a registered nurse, a nurse practitioner, a physician's assistant, or they may be trained in other areas, other medical procedure areas. They might be a radiology technician or something like that. But it's important that they have some sort of training in the medical field. They don't necessarily have to be a licensed medical practitioner in order to be a coordinator. So they're going to be experienced with medical procedures, doing things such as taking vital signs, performing ECGs, collecting blood draws, handling biological specimens. As these blood draws are collected, they need to be sent to the lab, so they have to have training in order to do that. And those are just an example of some of the areas that they need specific training in. They also need to have training and knowledge of good clinical practice, GCP, both what the FDA requirements are and the ICH requirements, because they're working in this very regulated environment, so they need to be aware of what those GCP requirements are. In many cases, they'll have some training in clinical research, maybe at a university or a community college, or they might participate in training that's conducted by private training organizations. There are lots of those out there. So there are a number of training avenues that one can go to collect some of the training that they need in order to perform as a clinical research coordinator. They also need to have computer skills. They do a lot of data entry, a lot of data analysis. So those computer skills come into play every day. And then finally, one of the areas that is very beneficial is in the certification area. They might seek to become a certified clinical research coordinator, which is sponsored by ACRP, which is the Association of Clinical Research Professionals, or they might opt to go for the Certified Clinical Research Professional certification, which is offered by SOCRA, which is the Society of Clinical Research Associates. Both of these certifications do require some amount of work experience, so it's not available for those that are just entering the field. They usually have to have at least some minimum amount of work experience in order to sit for the certification exam. But that can be certainly a way for coordinators to distinguish themselves from other coordinators that are out there working in the field, and that certification can be very beneficial for them. Some sites, if they're large enough, are going to have a regulatory associate, or at least someone that coordinates the regulatory activities for that site. So they're going to coordinate the regulatory functions at a clinical site, and they're responsible for keeping the site regulatory binder audit ready and up to date. This is a common practice, a continual practice, where the documents that are contained in that regulatory binder, some of them we've talked about up to this point. We'll talk about others as we go along. They need to be kept current, and they need to be kept in the proper location within that binder so that if an auditor were to come in or the FDA were to come in, they can very quickly find those things, find what they need to see in order to be confident that that site is operating in accordance with current regulatory practice. They may also coordinate these activities across multiple trials and with multiple sponsors. So they may not be dedicated to one specific trial. They may be operating and coordinating the activities of a number of different trials, and they could be coordinating activities at a number of different sites, depending on what the workload is and what their particular function is within that site. The regulatory associate's specific task would be to maintain the site regulatory binder. And if you look in ICH E6, Section 8, there'll be a listing of the documents that should be contained in that binder. There may be additional documents that are not in that Section 8 list that may be contained in there, or there could be some that are on the list that aren't necessary to be contained in there, depending upon the trial. They're also going to keep the essential regulatory documents current. These would include medical licenses, curriculum vitae, training certificates, lab documents, IRB approvals, any document that's going to have an expiration date. Medical licenses expire. They have to be renewed in most states every 2 years. CVs need to be signed by that individual within a 2-year period. So if it's coming up on that 2-year period, then that CV needs to be updated and needs to be signed with a current signature from that individual. They also communicate with the IRB and with the sponsor's regulatory staff. So sponsors are going to have their own regulatory function. They're going to be collecting some of the documents and things like that, as well as other activities. So the regulatory associate is going to communicate with them on a regular basis. And then finally, they're going to be responsible for submitting the required reports to the IRB. These could include the site status report, could be reports involving protocol deviations, reports that the required reports for serious adverse events, and there could be others that they're required to keep up with as well. So they have quite a few things to be associated with and to keep up with in their role. Now, not every site is going to have a regulatory associate. As I said, some of the larger ones will, but there are going to be a lot of smaller ones that won't have a regulatory person, a dedicated regulatory person. And for those sites, that these responsibilities are going to fall back on the coordinators for them to handle those activities. We've gone over some of the roles that we find at the clinical site, and now we're going to shift our attention to the site and the study activities. And as we do that, it's important for us to understand that there are a couple of different stages that occur during each trial. You have a study startup stage, which occurs in the beginning. Then you have a study conduct and maintenance stage that occurs sort of in the middle of the trial, which makes up the largest portion of it. And then finally, you have the activities that are associated with study closeout. So we'll go into more detail of each of those as we go along. So as we have different stages in our trial, we also have different types of monitoring visits. So initially, we may have a pre-study process visit, which we commonly call a pre-study site visit. And in that one, we're going out, we're assessing the site's capabilities and determining whether or not they're a suitable site for the trial. And then we may have a site initiation visit where they've been selected but they need to be initiated, they need to be oriented into all the activities that are going to occur during the trial. And then the heaviest part of the monitoring visits are really going to be during the duration of the trial, where we're conducting interim monitoring visits. So we're going out to the site on a periodic basis, hopefully on a regular basis, to assess how they're performing on that trial. And we have some specific activities that we're going to do during that trial, during each of those visits. And then finally, once we get to the conclusion of the trial, we're going to have our closeout visits, and we're going to wrap everything up, make sure the site's aware what their responsibilities are, moving forward, after we've collected all of our data, locked our database, and we've concluded the trial. So the first stage of our trial is going to be the study startup stage. And normally, in order to get that initiated, the first thing we're going to do is to send out a confidentiality agreement to a principal investigator, to a site. And the confidentiality agreement is between the PI and the sponsor, and is signed by persons in authority at both institutions. Now, depending upon the size of the site, that could be the principal investigator themselves, or it could be someone that's either responsible for all the research that's conducted at that site. They may be the one to sign that confidentiality agreement. And then on the other side of the fence, normally you're going to have an officer of the company, of the sponsor company, that's going to sign on behalf of the sponsor. So essentially what this is the PI is agreeing not to disclose any proprietary information that they learn during the initial stage of review for the study. So at this point, it's important to understand there's been no commitment one way or the other. All the sponsor's doing is they want to get the protocol out for the PI to review and hopefully determine whether or not they want to participate in the trial. In many cases, with most sponsors, the confidentiality agreement is also going to be accompanied by some type of site selection questionnaire where the sponsor is asking for some basic information about the site that they can complete and send back, and then the sponsor can assess that and hopefully make a determination if they want that site to participate in the study. A couple of the documents that we want to get out to the PIs during the startup are going to be the study protocol and the investigator's brochure. So the study protocol is going to be the document that describes the objectives, the design, and the methodology, as well as the statistical consideration and the organization of the trial. So anything that you want to, any piece of information required to conduct the trial should be contained in that protocol. It's going to explain everything that needs to occur in order for that PI and that site to conduct the protocol. You also have the investigator's brochure, and this is a compilation of the clinical and non-clinical data of the individual product that's relevant to the study of the investigational product in human subjects. So if there had been any trials that had taken place prior to that, that clinical data would be compiled in that investigator brochure. Information about adverse events, whether they are expected or not expected, that information is going to be in there. There's going to be scientific information about the product itself, its molecular makeup, its mechanism of action, all of those things that are associated, if it's a drug, associated with that specific drug or that specific compound. So these are important to get out there because the investigators, they are going to want to review that so that they know as much about that product as they can. So during the startup phase, we're also assessing the site feasibility and the PI interest. So the sponsor is going to be looking for sites that can successfully conduct the study. That's going to be based upon their past research experience, the PI's expertise in the therapeutic area, and access to qualified subjects. So those are going to be some of the primary areas that they're going to look for in determining whether or not they want that site to participate in their study. We're also going to get a contract and budget out to the site. So this is going to be a written, dated, and signed agreement between the sponsor and the site that sets out any arrangements on delegation, distribution of tasks and obligations, as well as the financial specifics that are associated with the trial. So there'll be a budget that explains how the site's going to be paid for the various procedures that they do, and everyone's going to have to agree to that. And then there's going to be some negotiating back and forth on it, but it'll be a signed document once we get finished, and then we can't really proceed much further until we get those contracts executed. So as we talked about earlier with the different monitoring visits that occur during our trial, in this startup phase or stage, we're going to conduct a pre-study site visit. This is going to be a visit that's conducted by the sponsor or by the CRO, if the sponsor is using a CRO, to determine the site's qualifications to conduct the study. So they're going to look at a lot of different elements, a lot of different things at the site to assess that and hopefully come away with a favorable assessment that will enable things to move forward, and we can get that site activated so that they can participate in the trial. Also, during this startup phase, we're going to begin collecting some of the essential documents that we're going to need for the trial. So there are a few of those that we want to collect during the startup stage. One is going to be the signed confidentiality agreement. We just went over that. We're also going to want the signed protocol signature page that verifies, that confirms that the principal investigator received the protocol, they had a chance to review it and read it. Also, we're going to collect the investigator's brochure acknowledgement of receipt. Once again, we want the PI to confirm that they received that and that they had a chance to review it. We're going to complete and execute our contract and our budget agreement to define on a contractual basis what's going to occur and what the budget requirements are for the site being paid by the sponsor. The site is also going to have a completed and signed FDA Form 1572. That will be the statement of investigator. That's the contract between the FDA and the investigator. And then we're going to collect financial disclosure documents. We've already gone into previously what financial disclosure is all about, so we need to collect those from each person that's listed, each sub-investigator that's listed on that 1572. Then also, in addition, we're going to collect CVs for the site personnel, a copy of their medical license, if that's applicable, and then also a copy of their good clinical practice training certificate. And we're going to collect all of those for each individual that's listed on that 1572. So those are just a few of the documents that we're going to collect during the startup phase. There are going to be others as well, but these are some of the primary ones that we're going to be collecting during that stage. In addition to collecting those essential documents, the site is also going to submit documents to the IRB for approval. So these are going to be the protocol and the investigator's brochure. They're also going to submit the informed consent form template that we're going to use to consent the subjects as they come in for visits. Also, any materials that'll be given to the subjects. So anything that we're going to pass out to them, any kind of information sheet or anything like that, say a diary, sometimes studies will use little wallet cards that might have reminders, things like that on them. Any kind of log that we might give them that we ask for them to kind of keep track of their medications that they're taking, or their any changes in their medical standing that might result in an adverse event. Any of those things need to be approved by the IRB. Also, any advertising copy that we're going to use to advertise the study, that could be in a newspaper or a newsletter, or maybe a flyer that gets posted someplace. Any TV and radio ads. You hear a lot of TV and radio ads that are advertising clinical trials, looking for patients who want to participate. So all of those need to be approved by the IRB as well. The IRB also has to approve any payments that we're going to make to the subjects. So we have to ensure that these payments are not so high that they could somehow be considered coercive, where the subject is only doing it because they're getting some money for it. So in that regard, they also need to be approved by the IRB. One of the other activities that occurs during the startup phase is going to be the investigators meeting. So this is going to be conducted by the sponsor or the CRO, and it's intended to convene all of the PIs in one location so that they can discuss the study and the specific elements and requirements of the study. They can get the training that they need, their staff can get the training that they need in order to conduct the study. So in addition to investigators coming, ordinarily study coordinators attend these as well. And also you've got personnel there from the sponsor who are going to administer the study, and these might include some of the monitors or CRAs that will be out monitoring the sites. They could be project leaders. They also may include people that work in data management or in drug safety. So there could be a lot of different people that are involved in the investigator meeting. In many cases, they tend to be fairly large. They're probably going to be held at a large hotel or convention center because you're going to have, more than likely, you're going to have hundreds of people there. So there's going to be a lot of folks, and there's going to be a lot of activities going on at that time. If you get a chance to go to an investigator meeting, I can tell you that they're actually a lot of fun because everybody's kind of sequestered there in one location. So kind of at the end of the day, there's some fun activities to be involved in. You get a chance to meet a lot of new people. So that's a fun activity for most people. So they are very beneficial, and they can be quite interesting if you get a chance to attend one. One of the other types of visits that can occur during the startup stage is going to be the site initiation visit. So this is a visit that's conducted at the site with the purpose of orienting that site to the study, to its procedures and its assessments. And in some cases, attendance at the investigator meeting by the site will eliminate the need for having a site initiation visit. So some of the same information that a monitor might discuss with the site during a site initiation visit would be discussed at an investigator meeting. So if they attend the investigator meeting, in some cases they don't have to have a site initiation visit. But either way, they've got to have some form of initiation training or orientation, if you will, before they can fully get started on the study. So at the final portion of our startup phase, the site's going to get the green light, which means that they have been fully activated, and this is going to occur after the site has completed all of the study startup requirements, and it also gives them permission for the site to start screening and enrolling subjects. So these requirements include some of the following, but aren't necessarily limited to these areas. So, for example, the site needs to have all of their IRB approvals. They need to have a completed contract and budget agreement. They will have to have completed all of their site initiation requirements, whether that's the site initiation visit or if it's attendance at the investigator meeting, that needs to be completed. And then they have to have all of the site materials, including the investigational product or the drug, on their site so that they can begin screening and enrolling subjects. So there may be some other requirements, depending on the sponsor and depending on the study, that they may have to meet before they can be green-lighted and be given the go-ahead to start screening and enrolling subjects. But these are the primary ones that every site is going to need to do in order to get that green light. So our next stage is that we're going to move into the study conduct and maintenance stage. So we're going to be conducting subject visits. The site's going to be conducting these, the site staff and the PI. So the site begins by screening potential subjects for the study. And then once they've identified these subjects, the site will bring in each subject into their facility to conduct a screening visit. They're going to be consented. They're going to go through a series of eligibility requirements to determine whether or not they meet the eligibility for the study. So anything that they need to be aware of, anything the subject needs to do at that point, it's all about determining whether or not that individual is eligible to participate in the study. So a key component to this conduct and maintenance stage is going to be the schedule of procedures and assessments. This is going to be listed in the protocol, so the site is going to know what they should be doing at each visit. So I've listed here a sample of a procedures and assessment table. So you can see in this table, as you look in the first column, that's going to indicate the assessment that occurs at each visit. So as you move from left to right on the table, you'll see the first visit will be the screening visit. And as you can see the check mark there, we're going to complete an HNP. We're going to do a urine pregnancy test. We're going to assess for any adverse events. We're going to take vital signs, do an ECG, do a serum chemistry, CBC, urinalysis. Those are going to be the assessments that are done at the screening visit, the very first visit. So then as the subject comes back for visit 2, there's going to be another set of assessments that are done. They may be the same ones depending on how the protocol is set up. So in this case, once again, we're going to do the urine pregnancy test again, assess for adverse events, do vital signs, do the CBC, urinalysis, and we're going to conduct some spirometry maneuvers at that visit. And then as you can see, as you move through the trial all the way from visit 1 over to visit 7, you can see which activities are going to occur during each visit. So that's going to tell us what we need to do when the subject comes in for each visit. So it's important to understand that if any of these procedures are not performed, if they're missed or the site coordinator forgot to do them, then it's going to be considered a protocol violation, and that probably will need to be reported to the IRB, and hopefully it won't be serious enough where it impacts the overall study. So every trial that we participate on is going to have this schedule of procedures, and the site personnel is going to become very familiar with how that works and to know what they're supposed to do during each visit. So once the site starts screening and enrolling subjects, the next type of visit that's going to occur is going to be the interim monitoring visit, and that's going to be conducted by a clinical research associate or a monitor. And this is going to be a visit to the study site to review the progress of the clinical study and to ensure that the protocol is being adhered to, you've got accurate data. We're going to assess the safety of subjects. We're also going to assess compliance with regulatory requirements and good clinical practice guidelines. So these are going to be conducted, interim monitoring visits are going to be conducted by the sponsor or the CRO, at somewhat regular intervals at that site throughout the study to assess each of these items during the course of the study. So the CRA is going to go out and spend a couple days out there, depending on how long it takes, and assess these things while they're there. Then finally, when we get to the end of our study, we're going to do a study closeout visit. So once again, the CRA or the monitor is going to go out to the site. It's going to be conducted at the site after all the subjects have completed all scheduled visits and all the clinical data has been monitored and verified. All the adverse events and serious adverse events have been reported and assessed. And then, this may also be completed as the study, if the study is stopped by the sponsor or the regulatory authority for any reason. So in some cases, studies might get put on clinical hold by the FDA, and that may precipitate the need to do a study closeout visit. But in most cases, they're going to be done at the conclusion of the trial, once all the activities have been completed, all the data has been cleaned, and then really it's the final item that needs to be done, at that site, before they complete everything. So once we complete our closeout visit, there are going to be some responsibilities of the site beyond that point. For example, one of the things that they're going to have to do is complete their final report. So after they've completed everything, the site's going to complete their final report to the IRB. It's going to include a summary of enrollment along with the subjects that withdrew from the study and any serious adverse events that may have occurred during the study. Some IRBs are going to have additional requirements. They're going to require that additional information be reported. This is kind of the basics of what's going to go in that final report to the IRB. And then the final thing will be the IRB will close that site and indicate that they've completed everything in accordance with the GCP guidelines, and then that will officially conclude the study at the site. One of the other responsibilities of the site following conclusion of the study is going to be the record storage or retention of records at the site. According to ICH guidelines, sites are required to store all records of the trial for a minimum of 2 years after approval of the marketing application or for 2 years after the product is discontinued. In some cases, the sponsor may have conducted some trials and the trials were not successful, and so they never proceeded with a marketing application, but they basically abandoned the drug because they saw that it was not effective. So in that case, from the date that they discontinued, moving towards a marketing approval, the site's going to be required to store those documents for at least 2 years following that date. Now, some sponsors and institutions may require that these records be retained for longer periods. And the other thing that you need to be aware of is that the record retention regulations in countries outside the United States may differ. So you may have countries in Europe or in other parts of the world that require these documents to be stored for longer periods of time. So there could be some differences in that, but The minimum of 2 years is pretty universal. Sometimes it can be longer, depending on who the sponsor is and what their requirements are. So you have some readings to do. First of all, I want you to read Chapter 8, which is titled The PI, the CRC, and the Study Site. This is found on page 163 of the Horse Named Jim book. That's the Clinical Trials Manual from Duke Clinical Research Institute. So in addition to reading Chapter 8, I'd like for you to read Chapter 11, which is the site or the study activities, and that begins on page 213. So in addition to those two chapters, I've included a document out online on Moodle that discusses the keys to building a successful research site. I'd like for you to review that document as well. And then I've also included an article that appeared in Clinical Researcher, which is the journal of the Association of Clinical Research Professionals, and it's titled Relationships 101, the Dating Game Between CRAs and Research Site Staff. It's a fairly short article, it's maybe 2 pages, and it kind of discusses, what the sites want from CRAs and kind of vice versa. So I think you'll find it kind of interesting in light of the content that we're going over here in the course. And then finally, there's a short YouTube video that I'd like for you to watch. It's about maybe 2 or 3 minutes long, but it's a video tour of a research site here in Raleigh called Wake Research Associates. Some of you may be familiar with Wake Research Associates. You may have heard of them, but they do a lot of research here in the local area, fairly large site. It'll give you a little video tour so you can kind of see, what the typical site, although most sites are probably not going to be quite that large, but they'll be very similar. So I'd like for you to kind of review that video, and I'll put the link out there so that you can easily get to it. So for your discussion forum this week, we've got what I think is going to be a kind of an interesting assignment for you to do. So based on the readings that you've got and the course content during this week, the lecture that you just listened to, I'd like for you to write a simple job description for one of the following roles at the clinical research site, either the clinical research coordinator or the regulatory assistant. You can pick whichever one you want. Or if you want to choose one of the other roles, the principal investigator or the sub-investigator, you can do that as well. But what I'd like you to do is to write a brief, simple job description that contains information on the types of activities that person in that role is going to do, the kind of training that you'd like for them to have, the kind of experience that would be necessary for them to have in order to be hired into that role. I think most of you are pretty familiar with what job descriptions look like, so I think it'll be kind of a fun assignment for you to do. There's no specific format in it. Probably keep it to about probably a page or so. You can post it directly in the discussion forum. You don't have to submit a Word document. You're not required to respond to your classmates, but if you want to go look at what they put on there, you can certainly do that as well. Anyway, let me know if you have questions about that, but I think the assignment is pretty straightforward. I don't think anyone's going to have any difficulty with it. So good luck to you, and let me know what questions you have.